Welcome to another episode of the Be a Maker podcast. Today we have with us Maria, who is the president of Enable Alliance, and we're going to chat with her about maker education. Hi, Maria. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. This is an important time to talk about maker education.
To start with, tell us a little bit about what you are doing at Enable.
Sure. And so we've been part of the open source community since 2013. That's when Ivan Owen had helped a maker create a prosthetic, partial a hand prosthetic for himself, and then create a hand for a young boy. Part of engaging a global community, even in just getting them together, and then and having them use some digital inspiration from a museum to create that prosthetic. And I think that people are probably familiar with the story. That the NIH 3D print exchange has recently been upgraded, revamped. So if you go to NIH 3D and you look at the prosthetics collection, those are all curated by the Enable community. Anything named after a bird of prey or referring to a bird of prey is a design that was started by one of my board members, Peter Binkley, for his son Peregrine. And that's how we became engaged in the community in 2013 and 2014. I started creating instructions that did not use words, that were very IKEA-like. I was able to make those by having kids help me in scouting. They were basically doing screenshots as we were looking at the designs. And we were designing for other kids. Our medical advisor was Albert Chi from Johns Hopkins Medical Institutions and Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratories. He was working on the most expensive prosthetics in the world. They were over $140,000 at the time. And right. And so he felt, before he was deployed by the Navy to Africa, that his last 3 months would have more impact if he worked with us on creating an inventory of hands and inviting guests through the World Health Organization from the Middle East. We worked with Ziv Medical Center, and we got them printers, materials, we gave them this inventory, we provided technical support, we provided instructions. I got translators from the group that I used to work with at Fees International and through the International Health group over at Hopkins, because I was had been working as the medical education coordinator for the neurosciences for Johns Hopkins Medical Institutions. And so, we really pulled a lot on the local resources. And so even now, most of the 3D printed prosthetics in the world have been created by kids in the Baltimore, Washington area. And as they've grown up, we've seen Peregrine go from working with FEMACore and building 3 hands one summer using his prosthetics. Now he's a welder, and he runs the TIG wire through one of the channels from the elastics formerly, so that he's still using these devices for his new occupation as a welder, the TIG welder. Other kids have grown up, and we've helped them make their first hands and arms for prom, adding in lights and sensors so it turns into a rave in their arm. One of the early advisors that we had created a beautiful Stratasys printed non-functioning arm that looked like lace and ran a portion of the girl's gown through it like ribbon to make it look like the gown. And so we always had a sense of how these skills that we had and the people we were helping, we were pushing each other to learn new materials, learn about new printers, but we also were pushing ourselves to create sustainable, affordable hands and arms that could be printed again by classrooms, and using materials that could be found anywhere in the world. So we had a close relationship with the FDA here, the Food and Drug Administration. I invited them to speak at every conference that we had when we were hosting EnableCon, and they really used us as a model for how to manage these open source designs and review them, not just for our classification for Class 1 medical devices with exceptions, so that we could keep innovating and not have to keep running back. They didn't want to interrupt the flow of innovation and getting these devices out to people. But when COVID hit, they had this model for how to handle everything that was coming in so that they could review it, they could pre-flight it. They had the 3D NH 3D print exchange for sharing collections and so on. And we got involved with open source medical supply around the world. We got involved with creating oxygen concentrators, with creating hydroponics and irrigation for people who needed to, now that they had a hand, how are they going to sustain themselves? How are they going to grow their own food? If they were in refugee camps, what materials did they have there in order to keep producing open source medical supply and ways to sustain or enhance the diet there? And how could we get them to start recycling the water bottles from emergency workers or from staff there so that kids were also creating jobs? We started learning about blockchain almost right away. The Government Blockchain Association was represented from our very first conference. But in working with the health and medicine working group, we really helped to develop the open source credibility in that committee, and also helped show them how UNHCR and the World Food Program, the International Coastal Cleanup were utilizing things like blockchain to transfer funds, to confirm someone's identity, to give someone access to banking resources when they didn't have them locally, when people needed to flee, how to add their credentials, how to add credentials that were gained informally through quick digital recognitions through the United Nations. That's the foundation of their staff education programs and the training of their volunteers worldwide. I was involved with digital recognitions and electronic portfolios at Hopkins as a way of documenting that we were meeting our requirements, and not just for the trainees, but also for faculty who are on a tenure track. And it was free to create these. So from the very beginning, with the youth that I was working with, we were creating our own badges and awarding them just so that we knew what their experience was and who we were talking to. But they had value in the makerspaces because it showed that they had the workforce skills to access this equipment and borrow it, take it home with them. And I thank the local community colleges for letting us do that. At the same time, they were working with the Children's Only Makerspace in Baltimore, showing what the workforce skills were on a step-by-step level so that kids from 11 and up could start knocking these out. And then when they got to college and applied, it was worth the first year as an engineering student. They waived the first year, calling it the equivalent of an AP engineering course. So it had monetary value. And they were able to expand the badges at the Digital Harbor Foundation to include not just photography and laser cutting, other hard, workforce skills, but also soft skills for leadership and communication, and for business acumen or entrepreneurship, because the kids there were creating their own businesses, making things for conferences at the community, at the conference center and things. There was something called new collar skills, and even now, that's still new vocabulary in workforce development. And so the idea was, you had white collar skills, you had blue collar skills, but then you had new collar skills. And these were people who could earn their chops, get their experience in informal learning, in maker spaces, in other community spaces. And so the WIOA funds for the workforce development from the federal government can be used with the new collar skills badges to give people training, to help them get, even tutoring and get the materials they need, get their review of what they've produced so that they can earn these skills and then get matched to employment opportunities in their community or elsewhere, because these are national and international mappings of workforce skills and then also soft skills. And so as an international partner for the for that badge program, we've been able to help people who, even on the run as refugees, are able to show that they have the credentials they need to use technologies and get hired at the medical clinic, at the refugee center, for instance, or in other community spaces, or even within the VA Centers of Excellence system for innovation, that they could walk into that facility and they had this portable portfolio, an electronic portfolio of their work and how it was reviewed and how other people said that it influenced them or helped them, so they could show it was a living skill. In the Trump administration, the language for educators to keep in mind is not just a digital portfolio, but in keeping with the world of blockchain, he's calling it a wallet. And these badges are not just electronic pictures, they're things that you can click on to see who awarded this. How was it reviewed? What were the requirements? People can give feedback and even give badges to what they think of the origin of that badge, because anybody could make a badge. It doesn't just feedback from the top down, but it's also from the learners and the information seekers and the need knowers who could say this person really helped me or this person gave me access. So they can also give that kind of feedback and challenge within a digital recognition's ecosystem. Digital
It's almost
recognition is
like a LinkedIn for maker education, right?
it really absolutely, and LinkedIn uses that digital recognition's
Yeah.
platform for that. There are many different companies; they have different platforms, but yes, that's it. There's a. It started with Mozilla and the MacArthur
Mm.
Foundation years and years ago when I was back at Hopkins, and we're still seeing the power of that right now. The fact that some of the platforms allow people to look at what badges have been earned, they can see who a good mentor might be to get in contact with in a
Mm.
way that's much more powerful than LinkedIn, because the people giving testimony about, I worked with this person, that's a way of showing it's a living skill. But for someone also to say that this, that that the skill was used for something else, that the evidence was used for something else, it can show a lasting ripple effect in that community. So I could look and say, I want to do that. What was your pathway to doing that? And I could start working my way through the same badges in that ecosystem, or working with another badge and then show the equivalency. And then I could, even if I'm a migrant worker or if I'm a student that's moving around with parents who have jobs that require them to move a lot in government or whatever, I could say I'm consolidating this badge and this organization is going to accept my badge instead of that, without having to go through government to do that. This is something that could happen because business owners and business influencers in a community recognize a need and a gap and can do this on the fly according to what they're able to assess and the jobs that they're opening up. So we need to take a breath for a moment and see that we already have the ingredients we need for the recipes we need to start making right now. And so we could leverage the free digital recognition platforms within a classroom. Many teachers do that. That we could leverage someone else's badges, like Skills USA has an extraordinary system for doing this. Curriculum that is multilingual, curriculum that is extremely well illustrated, has videos to go with it, but you have to pay for that. And so maybe you want to take a look and see what elements are they willing to provide, what elements might they be willing to share. Maybe there would be some other form of support or exchange where we have proven ways of developing a workforce, and we can also quickly see what badges are you chasing? How big is the gap in my community? Because I could leverage that to say, there's someone in my community who is, looking for employees who have this skill, and there's someone over here who is offering to teach that to me and even certify me in it. And that's when the federal funds, the WIOA funds, could be used to give you that skill in a matter of weeks or months, rather than disrupting your family life by forcing you to go to school and earn a degree that you don't really need in order to get that job. Even better, it might be that you've shown you have the skills to get that job from the makerspace and the maker community, and then the employer is going to pay for your continued education so you can get that degree. But the classrooms in a regular setting should be reaching out more to businesses, business leaders in their area, to business organizations in the area, like manufacturing, manufacturers, or and the a small scale industry. I mean, there's textile, woodworking. That there's many organizations, not just employers, but and they should invite them to not only describe what the opportunities are for the students, so that they know what they should reach for, what they can do. They have a map in their own mind for, I have this interest, where can it take me? That kind of partnership can really
Mm.
jumpstart us, any student from not knowing their value, to being, having a self perception that there is a place for them, and that there is a need for them, and that their impact could be, really quick, because they have internships and other camps and other opportunities where they can start, to have business experiences that will make them more valuable and help them understand, and then go back into schools, without having, the school curriculum retool. The schools will never be able to retool fast enough for business,
Yeah.
but with the
Is
help of
this, you
business,
think,
it,
is this like, working with the businesses? Do you think that is like, is there some sort of inherent challenge in that? Like,
it depends.
that potentially we need to overcome, because from a systemization point of view, I can see all the open source characteristics that you mentioned. There's so much more flexibility. It's almost like, what we call Web 3.0 version of a social
Yeah,
academic network. That's what this is. But the
absolutely.
key participants, because the manufacturers would be both the mentors, but
Mhm.
also specifying what are the skills they require, and then obviously they'll be the employers too.
Yes. So here in Maryland and with Baltimore, they really tried to become, a hub, for excellence in 3D printing.
Okay.
Similarly, I've seen 3D printing and drones, in North Carolina.
Mm, okay.
I've seen wearables and textiles in Philadelphia and in New York. It is difficult for people to establish apprenticeships, and create, identified trainers and those kinds of credentials, or to use standard, um, educational curriculum that gets mapped and goes through the board and approved, and then finally introduced on a small scale in school and then a larger scale. It's so much faster to combine the strengths of the community, the school, and the makerspace, to use these smaller, bite sized chunks of experience and learning
Mm,
that will have immediate relevance on resolving the problems within that community. Um, and to have that as a way to include education in business funding, to show the resilience of a community. They're very aware of the gap, um, but we need to show them that the role of the makers was not just the designs, not just the micro manufacturing, but as the place of opportunity, not just for innovators and entrepreneurs who are already recognized, but for people who are inventing themselves right now and have all those dreams, those ideas, those visions already in them. It would be to our detriment not to support them and seize the moment, to be more innovative in how we see the role of the makers and the maker spaces that we have, to pivot towards innovation and the business language that's being used right now by the Trump administration, by local chambers of commerce, by the national and regional, manufacturing, associations. If we look carefully at that, if we look at the kinds of awards, the kinds of conferences they're holding, we have the language we need in order to, pivot education and maker spaces to survive in this current environment. We can't say we're doing it for diversity or equity or inclusion, especially at a time where the federal government is laying off veterans because they were hired under DEI initiatives. That's shocking to me. So we have people in our local community who need us and have served us well, and might have needs that we can fulfill because of the physical or needs for adapting things or helping them to adjust into the current climate. Also, people have been laid off in the tens of thousands, and so they are not being given a transition plan. They are. If you look at the Department of Education, last night, 50% of them were told that they would be working from home today for security reasons. And so they didn't even know that they were being laid off. They haven't been told to look at their resume. They haven't been told to sharpen their skills. They haven't been invited to look at their community where they currently are and see how they would want to pivot. Um, so we need to give them not only that resource and that opportunity, um, we should be giving them that recognition and that hope because they've served the community well. They know so much, and it would be to our detriment not to try to reach out and incorporate them into formal or informal education and business resilience plans for our community.
So what, like, this as a method or as a program,
Mhm.
would you say that it's already out there as a pilot? Like I'm kind of trying to almost analyze it through the lens of how one would look at, say, a startup in terms of terminology. So would we say that this is more at MVP level, or have we trialed it as a pilot and it's prototyped? Like, how would you, if just for the sake of understanding, how would you classify the stage that we're at with something like this?
So digital recognitions have been used for workforce development and for creating mobile credentials for people when especially it was possible to do it quickly, for the
Hmm.
current population to meet a current business gap or a community need. Um, and this has been available for decades. So this is not a test system. The Department of Labor has been mapping across the nation workforce skills in stages so that not just because they envisioned a mobile workforce, but they wanted people to know what that credential meant. So, for instance, Walmart had mapped out their digital recognitions several years ago. So this is not a pilot by any stretch of the imagination. This is something that has been in use internationally. It's not just the in traditional education settings, but deliberately because it was possible to use these for for industry. For instance, if you were credentialed as someone who was able to work on an oil rig, might have to wait almost 2 months to receive those credentials once you had earned them. But using a digital recognition, you could leave same day. So this was the kind of thing that we were talking about back in 2010 in industry. And so we're catching up as educators with what industry and what international workers have already been doing and have found served not just in a standard setting, but have served in crisis. Um, so when I was getting our community through COVID, um, during a crisis, you cannot credential people in the medical reserves. That phase is over. And there, during Katrina, when I was at Johns Hopkins, people were calling saying that they couldn't show what they'd completed in their training program or who they were as faculty. Um, and so, having an international standard of exchange for medical education was really valuable. So again, we're talking about 2009, 2011. So digital recognitions have been used for high stakes and for high value salaries to credential workforce to show that they are in a high stakes role as people who could work with vulnerable people or with children. And the National Organization of Volunteers Active in Disaster, that would be FEMA, Red Cross, um,
Right.
the International Children's Organizations. Um, their digital recognitions include their background checks. They include the things that you need in order to know that you're working with someone credible in an emergency, and that it's something that you could look up online.
Mm.
It maps to a single individual, and if more evidence becomes available that means that it should be revoked or altered, then they've been doing that for individuals for quite some time. But you can also do that for organizations. And so you'll see digital recognitions have also been used to say that a nonprofit was credible. Um, and other platforms are credible. We are giving digital recognitions now to certify blockchain, and for instance, blockchain for shipping, for Ripple, or other other scenarios. So it's fascinating to me that not only are some of us just catching up with the idea that this is something in our grasp that we could use right now, but that other people have taken it even farther into other technologies in order to capture that evidence immutably, to exchange it, to secure it anonymously. If you're a woman in Afghanistan learning science or teaching STEM, um, that you can have those credentials, you can get paid for them, but you're not at risk in, until you are ready to reveal that as part of your digital identity or online identity. So they, I think at this moment in our nation, we can start looking at what is the role of the makerspace, what is the role of educators, and start thinking about what is my responsibility to create opportunity. And so if if one road is being shut down, or if one road is a little dangerous and problematic, or if it looks like there are delays, while the state's attorney generals are figuring it out, this is something else. And this will end up making us more resilient, because
Mm.
anytime that the business community can see what is happening in the classrooms and what the graduates and the students are thinking and preparing themselves for, at the very least, they will be supportive. At the very least, they will recognize that there are students here who would make good interns. There are opportunities I see that I haven't opened up that I could give them, even in small, you know, phases of time, or as a collaborative venture that could be much more significant. So, in the Enable community, I initially judged um, that is some hand designs that came from Imhotep Institute. It's a high school in a food desert, in an area of Philadelphia where it's it's really fraught, quite honestly. Um, During COVID, I was getting 5-gallon buckets and driving them up there so that we could distribute materials to teach science, and then they could use them to grow food. Um, and the challenge that I gave them was the same one I give the kids in our makerspace or the kids in the pediatric oncology program when I'm doing STEM with them. It's like, make one for yourself, make one to give, make one to sell. See what that
Mm.
feedback is like. See how that changes your design, how that changes your price point, um, how it changes your sense of, the speed for the manufacturing and so on. They took it to a whole new level. Not only did they follow what I was asking them to do, making devices for people and adapting things for Ingles House, which is a residence for people who have had traumatic injuries. The average age is 37. Most of them are not able to use wheelchairs, but they still have gardens that move from room to room. They still try to adapt things to do assistive gardening, it's therapy, and also for the being able to have that therapeutic gardening. And then the social workers who are using the maker spaces in every apartment complex or every home are using them to adapt things for the needs of the residents, or to help teach things and have manipulatives. So they were willing to partner, but then they took it another step and said, what's our pain point? And clean water was a pain point. They learned to 3D print
Mm.
water filters. And then they made 3,000 of them for Jacksonville. So a clean water need, we don't need to just look to Flint. We could look to our own cities. Um, but they also, they looked at other partners in their network, and then the Philadelphia Eagles, in partnership with them, sent a videographer and helped support them on a trip to Africa, where they 3D printed 3,000 more water filters and helped to build a school and recognized the need for the prosthetics. So they saw the challenge also in how do we grow food. So they've gone from the 5-gallon buckets to outfitting a shipping container that is the equivalent of 2.5 acres. It uses between 15 and 17 gallons of water a day. It's powered by solar panels on the top of it. Um, so they end up, powered by an old laptop inside, so that's soilless, which is great for people who have challenged immune systems or are living in healthcare settings as well. And very low water, but every 2 weeks they're harvesting from this shipping container to feed the school and the neighborhood and to replant. And I've seen this on much smaller scales, with using hydroponics as well. I think what we will find when we start giving out these digital recognitions and when we look at the conversations within the community, that we're going to see not only that they went along the path that we had envisioned for them, but they pivoted for community need, and that they applied the technology in ways that we could not have imagined for ourselves because we did not have the um, experience to perceive that kind of need in our community or in the within the human network that these people might have because of their relatives or because of where they travel. Um, we're going to see with these digital recognitions, if we use them well, that we are creating not only the opportunities that we're badging and creating the opportunities and in hiring people who have these credentials, but that we are empowering people to see how someone else got from here to there and what they thought was useful or what innovative thing they did to solve a problem in a way that we haven't been able to do before because it wasn't evidence based. And I think that for schools and for makerspaces and anyone else operating in a nonprofit sector, it has to be evidence based. And it has to be in combination with the community and, and business in this environment, because that is what our current administration is about. Um, and so we're going to find that we're most successful when we are making ourselves most relevant. We would have been doing this anyway, I think, but we're just going to change our language a bit, and we're going to make sure that as educators or connectors, that in creating opportunities for these students, that we're going to let them represent themselves and their work through these badges or in a portfolio at least, so that they're ready to show what they can do, that they're ready to see themselves as capable people, and they're able to present to other employers or other educators or make it up. There's a whole world of, in the university level and the high school level, make your own class, make your own major. I would love for people to realize that we don't need people to tell us in a system that's too slow to respond what we should be doing. And I think that if people have that pain point, they can raise their voices and ask. The maker community has been so good at that. And the maker community is so perfectly positioned to be that common ground, that safe space, or that hub where people can connect in their community and then innovate for the next thing that the business community needs.
No, that's I think that's going to be super important for us as we move, right? Like, I mean, can empower not just one but multiple generations, right?
And absolutely. And if we do this well, I think that we'll see that the soft power that we lost in
Mm,
maybe losing USAID or in the shock to the international system when nonprofits can't move, they're not funded, or that they're restricted from operating. Like, this is another chance for people to connect with people, and
yeah,
for that community,
yeah,
that ecosystem, to step up and fill a void. that gives me hope. Honestly, the open source
No,
community,
I mean
open
I
badges.
think it should, right? So if I switch tracks a little bit, I wanted to ask you a little more about, like, you if we had to go into numbers, like you said, if we do it well. So how would you define some of those milestones? Like, how would we know that, here's we've started to make an impact? And this, I'm not asking for anecdotal, but do you have any sense of what those numbers might be? Like, are we going to see evidence, you think, from employment, particularly,
Mhm.
number of jobs, for example, number of new businesses, new products? Like, in
I would
your mind, what would be those metrics?
I would look at LinkedIn and what LinkedIn has done in the past
Okay.
5 years, because you see people who didn't really see the value in a digital recognition to all of a sudden being really proud to show that they're a Cisco systems, administrator, or that they have their
Mm,
CC from ISC2, or from CompTIA, the Security Plus. I mean, these are all certifications that you could get training for free from a local library. From the makerspace here called Nova Labs, they have had people who have hosted cybersecurity hands-on evenings, or when they've looked at research, could you de-identify this data? How hard do we have to press to know how secure our data is, or how secure an identity is, or how reproducible this research is, because we can get to the core data. So makerspaces are places where you can have those conversations. But at first, I don't think people realized that there was any value in that. But then when you see that for over 10 years, that children have been able to waive college credits, that's money. Or that people have been able to use the certification they got for free from the library and from YouTube. That is real money. And so when we see those posted on LinkedIn and see people exchanging that image that you can click on to see when they got it, or to see that it's current, that digital recognition is a currency of trust that is unlike anything else, and it's being leveraged in LinkedIn very well. So we can do it too.
how how would, like, funding for something like this work if we had to implement it in specific, like, I mean, I live on the West Coast.
Oh, it's
There are
okay. With
several
TBDC
cities
there.
here. Yeah, where there are several cities here where, I know that people would be willing to contribute, but how would that model and structure look like? What resources would you need to pull something like this off for a specific city or a community?
So I'm going to take two or three badges that we have in the new collar skills.
Mhm.
So 3D printing, laser cutting, photonics.
Right.
So if you took those as examples, people
Hmm.
outlined what the skills were, and then you can earn those recognitions at different levels. For instance,
Okay.
thermoforming of 3D printing is not a level one skill. For instance,
Mm.
or working with some of the other materials and types of printers, like resin printers. That's not a level one thing.
Right.
So the if somebody wanted to learn this, they could find three jobs that were hiring people who had that skill. Um,
Hmm.
so in Baltimore, we had an apprenticeship, and it was a long process. It was difficult for some people to transition to that kind of rigor. It was not a form of learning they were accustomed to, and it was extremely expensive for the business. To so much so that they've had at least two different companies that tried to have state apprenticeships in 3D printing, and abandoned it because it
Mm.
was the expense and the amount of time taken. If a digital recognition is in bite-sized pieces, then it allows people to do it on their own time, or to do it for a short period of time that would not be so disruptive to their family or to their employer. So it could be done in conjunction, or it could also be done with the help of the job force workforce training program. So if you found three employers who wanted someone who had that ability, that skill, you could go to your county's employment assistance center. So we have one for workforce development is what they call it here in Maryland. It might have other names where you are, but it's on a county level, and then there are also state level ones. But go to the county one and make an appointment saying that you want to apply for WIOA funding, and if you show that there are at least three employers who are currently looking for someone in that skill, then they will start processing your application and looking at where you would be allowed to spend federal funds in order to get training and take whatever was necessary to certify you. So, just like people could buy books and
Mm.
videos and online testing materials to get trained in cybersecurity. People could do this to get trained in maker skills, but the maker space or the school that's offering that, the library that might have that program, or the chamber of commerce, or your community business center that has you know maybe this entrepreneurship center, innovation center, if they could apply to receive federal funds, and so that money would be paid to them to provide the training and materials and the assessment. Um, the With the new collar skills, then you have a criteria. There's a you know, they have to be able to do the following things and present evidence that they do, and there's someone who will review it, so that they could have the training with you, and then they could get the review by somebody who is somewhere else in order for them to present their work and for it to be reviewed, and then the badge awarded. But the nice thing about that badge is that they'd be able to give feedback about the institution where they got it, and the teacher who gave it to them, and the people who helped them along the way,
Right.
or support, and as well as showing who they are. And then people who are interacting with them and their employer would be able to give feedback as well. So there's um, there's a checks and balances system in that as well. And then if that
Interesting.
person wanted to say, hey, I also figured out how to do this other skill in scanning or something, they'd be able to throw down their badge and say that they've earned
Mm.
it. But if that badge has value, then we have a format for adding that to our curriculum, or an employer has a gauge for how to request that skill in a way that they will be competent in that setting. It is okay for people to create their own badges and say that they've earned it and show how they did it, because it allows the community to see evidence and give feedback on that. So
Right. Right. I mean, it sort of, I think, offers you. I mean, I've been an educator previous lives, and it it sounds to me the one fantastic thing about this is that, which I think you've already pointed out, which is that the learner has a lot of agency
yeah,
in their learning journey, and I think that is so difficult to achieve. I know there's been many experiments, so many things, and now with AI, for example, there's so many assistive tools
yes,
that are being designed to help the learner. But in this case, it really sounds like the learner will have complete agency, and they can pick and choose which points of interaction can be paid, which points of learning can be paid or unpaid, which can be just experiential, which can be community driven. It all sounds amazing, actually. So I guess
and
to ask a very more simplistic, forward-looking question would be like, well, what's stopping this from becoming the global standard in this space? You think, like, and
it
and on
it is
what could we do to enable
it's
that?
so it this is a standard elsewhere. I mean, this is how
Sure.
people are getting trained by the United Nations in field work and in all kinds of soft skills and hard skills. This is, um, you know, having this curriculum and this digital recognition is how Skills USA is training
Yes.
amazing kids on the high school level to do things quickly, with responsibility and ethics, and um, an amazing sense of innovation within a workforce process. I mean, they really they might be earning the same recognitions and then taking it to another level. So maybe the new collar skills would have a role in a consolidated badge, the same way that the the makerspace skills when they're consolidated at the community college level are all of a sudden
Mm,
AP engineering. Do you know what I mean? But that vision and that history is something that we'd be able to see if we were using these well. And that was the goal in mapping workforce skills at Walmart and in other, large national workforces with the Department of Labor earlier. It's something that they're using with internally that we should be using and we could use as part of that exchange when people, especially when people are so mobile. And I think it would be easier for people to show their impact and their value, like, and their ability to create jobs in many cases,
right.
as people who have gone from innovating to creating a business and then to moving into an area of not just mentorship, but but being being able to go to the next level as community problem solvers and people who should be seen at a whole other level of community engagement and having a role in industry. People who are able to say, you know, if was it environmentally friendly or was it responsible for the ecosystem that we have? I mean, those
Mm,
are almost two different things. One sounds
yes.
relevant and immediate, and the and it sounds like something that you could get a lot of endorsement on in the way that
Mm,
we kind of look for in LinkedIn right now. And similarly, I think that um, if we realize how these are being leveraged outside the United States in industries on an industry level, and also being leveraged to promote experiences like when somebody visits a town. There are, they almost regard it like a passport stamp. It's a way of getting to know
mm,
the community that your ecosystem can create badges for different levels of learning and experience. And one might be to draw people in. One might
mm,
be because you are a sponsor who, is supporting the robotics team or but
right.
also giving them the experience of what is robotics in your industry. How does this fit in on my path as a student, with my trajectory
Mm, mm,
to be entering the workforce. I would also challenge people to create for themselves the goal of not just creating opportunity, but for helping people find their voice as need knowers. Um, Being able to say, we need funding for this, or what is stopping me is that this element is missing in this community. Um,
gotcha.
and so, by creating a channel for that kind of advocacy and that kind of speech, because it's evidence based, I think that is incredibly powerful, and I think that it's necessary at this point in time.
Mm,
It's not enough, for instance, for a nonprofit to say, I do good work, but it is incredibly important now when there are so many nonprofits that are scrambling financially. There's so many people looking for jobs. They need to be able to say, this is our impact, that we raised these funds, it went to this program. This is the evidence I have that comes out of it. I can track these people. I can show that that last mile happened and we delivered that program. I can show you how many people attended that lecture and got, our playbook by putting a QR code up at the last slide and having them do that. People do that in politics and other major global conferences and other industries.
right.
Um, we can do it too.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think that it could become almost like you're saying, like a universal system, right?
It's
For
necessary.
and as a say, I also run a startup. We're a small business. We're a small employer. Now, if I wanted to start looking for potential future employees with the skills, what would I do? as a startup entrepreneur or as a business owner?
I would recommend you contact the Chamber of Commerce or the Employee Assistance Centers, for workforce development for your county also. Um, but
Okay.
also talk to me because we have a platform for this, and we're growing it. Especially because I want to help people who are pursuing funding or willing to act as fiscal sponsors for projects. I want it to be easy for them to collect the evidence to show
Mm,
that not only that it happened and what the impact was, but I want people to be able to build on that as individuals. That your credentials don't stay in that school system. They don't stay with something that might become defunct, but that
mm,
there's something that travel with you, and that it's something that you can use to leverage your presence in a community and conversation, so that if you see there's a need for something, you don't also have to wait for someone else to build it, that you can just
right.
start innovating it. And it would be easier in a community, leveraging a makerspace or working with a small business that would be willing to work on this with them, or with a government agency that might be working with volunteers. Um, that's not only where we will have, problem based, project based learning, or solution based learning, that will address these problems right away. If we do it in bite sized chunks, then we already have the evidence we need to go chase more funding. We already have the evidence we need in the language that they're looking for us to pursue more funding as a pot for our community to apply for. Um, we
Mm,
need to start gathering these kinds of evidence and giving these kinds of recognitions to one another, just so that we can start creating those funding. And if people see that there's a gap, if people see that there's a community need, if there's something that's missing, wouldn't it be just amazing to throw down that gauntlet and see who'd be willing to put that together and earn
together.
that?
Yeah.
It's the same thing as giving sponsors, you know, for an internship, or sponsors for a project or for a makerspace. If they donate at that level, giving them that recognition. You know, that's something that we can leverage this in many kinds of ways. But we are living in a world where if you don't have evidence, it's going to be, and you don't have that network of interconnectivity, it's
Mm.
going to be very hard to show that you are relevant enough for a shrinking pool of funds where there are a lot of people competing.
Well, that makes sense. Well, Maria, thank you so much for sharing this. I'm hoping that some of our listeners who are interested, being learners, or like myself, who are entrepreneurs who are looking to employ bright young minds to work in their companies, are going to be interested after listening to this show.
Remember,
Thank you again.
some of these platforms are free, so look at digital recognitions or digital
Yeah.
badges, and then leverage everything you can on your county and state level. You go, oh, by the way, look for the legislation that Maryland was able to pass because of COVID. They wanted to recognize the role of the makers in responding, and talk about the business and innovation and micromanufacturing as community resilience and disaster response. Those are categories where people have been able to preserve funding and jobs, um, and create more pools of funding on a state level. But in Maryland, we actually were able to pass legislation that we needed to create a makerspace in every district. We needed to grow innovation, manufacturing, and entrepreneurship there. Um, these are also places right now where we are teaching civics, where people are gathering to try and figure out, you know, what the language is. How do
Mm.
we call for appropriations? What kinds of bills do we need passed? I mean, these are becoming the new third space for surviving in this environment. And I'm hoping they'll also become the safety net for people who need it and should not
Yeah,
despair, because the
for
future is
sure.
still being invented and we can do it.
All right. Well, once again, thank you so much for sharing. It was wonderful having you on the podcast. I'm sure, I mean, I learned a lot from everything you said, and I'm sure our audience will benefit from this.
Oh,
Thank you once again.